Chapter 30, Lord Latimer's Ladies by Margaret Elin Schmidt and Dan McLaughlin. Chapter 30, Miss Pocket's Predicament. In the dramatic pause that followed, Alice gave a nervous little laugh. I can't believe I just did that. Was it really me? It was, and you were quite right, my dear. She clearly had abused her position, said Lenora. She acted for her self-interest rather than yours, added Iris. You did precisely as you ought to have done, concluded Eliza, and then summoned Miss Pocket, tentatively offered Alice. The drama and adrenaline of the moment fading. She is your maid, dearest, said Iris in gentle but firm tones. The servants will have already brought her the news about what happened with your housekeeper, said Eliza. She is almost certainly waiting in the servants' quarters for you to ring the bell and summon her, pointed out Lenora. I know that, admitted Alice, but she could feel herself blushing. But it seems just the tiniest bit high-handed. Carl, the castle, had a lot to learn in the empathy department. He was already clanging the bell for Miss Pocket without a thought for any of Alice's misgivings. Excuse me, said Brian, suddenly lurching to his feet. I need. He fished through the high blood sugar soup of his brain, but he couldn't think of the correct phrase for bathrooms in this era. With a grunt, he stumbled out of the room. The water closet, Alice said, in answer to the mystified looks the ladies gave her. Ah, said Lenora, from her vantage as the only other married woman in the room. He did drink a great deal. Exactly, said Alice. She sighed. I don't know why Carl needs what he needs, but I hope we can solve Miss Pocket's riddle quickly and get my brother back home. I can't help but worry. She shared a smile with the ladies, talking with Master Sharp, and then Mrs. Downs made me realize how tangled it's all become. Not all of the servants here are time traveler, and what's going to happen to them when we travel to the future? What do you mean? asked Eliza. I mean, if Carl is a time traveler too, if, when we do succeed, will the castle disappear with us? Will you be left standing in a castle-shaped hole with the cook and the footmen and possibly the horses? She put up a hand to rub her forehead where a headache was coming on strong. They will be all out of work with nowhere to live. I don't think it will be as bad as that, said Lenora practically. The stables are sturdy and completely separate from the main building. The grooms and liverymen live over the stables, and I'm sure something can be arranged for the kitchen folk. Alice made a gesture toward the window, trying to encompass the whole of the estate that surrounded Carl. Eliza, you'd take such good care of the gardens. You'd love them, I know. I would, admitted Eliza. They're beautiful. And Lenora, you could really put the land to good use, said Alice. Better use, said Lenora, but with a smile, to take any arrogance out of the words. I do have a knack for managing property. Let me write it out, said Alice, turning toward a writing desk at the end of the room and sitting down. Keep the papers with you. If everyone thinks I'm Miss Latimer, the Dowager's heir, then I should have every right to pass on the property to you both. The gardens to Eliza and the fields to Lenora. It's the least after I can do after you've both helped Brian and me so much. Iris, is there anything? Brian re-entered the room, his clothes in disarray, and immediately went to the closest pitcher of water and started drinking. Brian, come and sit down, said Iris, ignoring Alice's query. She gave a polite nod to the nearest servant. Please ensure his lordship has sufficient water to drink at all times. The servant acknowledged her request and scurried away to comply. The socialite was so focused on settling Brian comfortably that she didn't even notice Miss Pocket had come into the room in his wake. The maid stepped into the room and took in the scene. Her expression, a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "Oh dear," Miss Pocket murmured. "It's all right," said Alice, both to herself and her friend, getting to her feet and passing the paper on which she'd been writing to Lenora for safekeeping. "Would you join us? We're working together to solve the castle's riddles. We think, that is, the castle says that if we answer them all correctly, then everyone can go home, including you." "The castle says?" Miss Pocket echoed, latching onto one of the more sticky points of the argument. "Yes," said Eliza. "Miss Latimer discovered that the castle could speak after a fashion. The castle slammed a shutter once." "Carl's doing the best he can," said Alice, a little defensively. The castle offered a supportive sort of groan that some may have mistaken for a rattle in the pipes. "Is that to do with the riddle poem I was given when I arrived on that dark and stormy night?" asked Miss Pocket. "Did the castle write it?" A door down the hall slammed twice in quick succession. "That means no," Brian said. In his foggy state, he was taking over the simpler parts of Carl's conversation rather than trying to initiate any of his own. "So then who?" asked Miss Pocket. "Mrs. Downs," said Alice. "Ah, the butler did it." The thought seemed to amuse Brian. The obedient servant had returned with a pair of brimming water pitchers, and Iris handed Brian another glass of water. "According to what she has told us," Alice continued, "Mrs. Downs wrote the poems because she wanted the new arrivals to work with enthusiasm. She wrote the riddles in such a way that they were unsolvable to keep the new arrivals motivated," she added, frowning. "She must not have wanted to risk her position as head of the household. She has lost it now," said Iris. "Quite right," said Eliza. "Her behavior caused so much suffering." anyway," said Alice, settling into her role of Lady of the Manor with increasing ease. "I wonder whether you would be willing to tell us the riddle that was presented to you when you arrived at the castle, Miss Pocket." "Well, I can," said Miss Pocket, "but I doubt you'll be able to solve it. Or, rather, it's easy enough to solve, but pointless." She put on her reciting at the head of the class face and began. The riddle was, "At the ball or at the races, in noble manner or common spaces, beneath coat of will or cotton superfine, it does the letter X define. They become handy when it's a belt you lack, or the waist of your pants are just too slack. It must be blue or it just won't work. Falling pants make the audience smirk. A type of support, a shoulder loop. Without it, a gentleman's pants, slacks would droop. They are not getting any better, are they?" Iris sighed as Miss Pocket finished her recitation. The house settled as if listening to hear what was to be made of this. Brian settled too into a dull stupor. He was vaguely glad that the ladies had taken over solving the puzzles more complex than simple shutters banging. His headache had intensified beyond capability for detective work. The relief granted from swallowing the water was lessening with each glass he drank. Miss Pocket shrugged. "It's obviously a pair of suspenders, but why did Mrs. Downs feel the need to have a pair of blue suspenders?" "Because," said Alice, searching for an answer, "whoever heard of blue suspenders?" supplied Eliza, intently but innocently. "Clearly someone who has not met Brian," muttered Alice. "Yes," said Miss Pocket, so intent on her tale that she ignored Alice. "I have maintained a vigilant eye," she continued, "looked high and low for anything that could match, but it was no use. I am responsible for the servants' laundry, and I have had plenty of opportunity to see what the serving men have for undergarments, but Mrs. Downs was strict in her requirements for how the men could dress. All suspenders are black as befitting the house and their station. Carl, do the suspenders have to be blue? Alice said to the room at large. The shutters banged once. Brian took a breath, ready to translate. He means yes, dear, we know, said Iris before he could say anything. But Lord Latimer must have brought some, asked Eliza. Certainly, all that theater he performs would suggest he has such a pair about him at all times, I dare say. With that reasonable assumption, everyone looked at Brian expectantly. Left them at home, mumbled Brian. Alice said it was not my wedding and I had to be nice. It wouldn't have mattered anyway, Alice pointed out. We were time-napped in the middle of the night and arrived without any luggage. Miss Pocket favored the room with a small, wry smile, and while the Dowager was alive, she was very antisocial. She would only invite ladies to visit, and ladies, unfortunately, don't wear suspenders. Well, said Lenora, a blush creeping over her cheeks. Stares of bafflement swung towards the reserved widow. No, not wear them per se, she laughed self-consciously. But at least in my case, a lady might keep a pair of suspenders as a memento. A memento of what? Asked Eliza, baffled. Alice's voice was warm with sympathy as she supplied the answer. Her husband. Lenora looked up thankfully. Yes, he wore them to our wedding feast and later when he celebrated the conclusion of a particularly auspicious business endeavor. It was a fancy of his. He told me that when he wore them, it was as if I were at his side. Her eyes welled with unexpected tears, and the widow took a moment to compose herself. He went so suddenly, she said. Eliza, who was closest, supplied her with a handkerchief. And you brought them here? Asked Iris after a moment. Lenora nodded. I bring them with me everywhere. Oh, I know it's foolish and sentimental, but in my early days as his widow, it was a comfort to have them nearby. I imagine they brought me luck in my business endeavors just as they used to do for him. But are they blue? Miss Pocket dared to ask. Yes, of course, said Lenora. Herbert's lucky blue suspenders. Smiling through her tears, she brought out a well-used pair of bright blue suspenders from her reticule. She gave them a fond look, then laid them gently on the table with the book. No, said Alice. We couldn't, said Brian. There must be some other way, said Alice. Nonsense, said Lenora, adopting her more familiar, brisk tone. I have carried them far too long as it is. She addressed Brian and Iris, where he leaned against her on the sofa. I shall offer them as a wedding present to you both, she said. They will serve quite well both as something old and something blue. Thank you, said Brian. Yes, thank you, echoed Alice and Iris. And my book, said Eliza. It could be your something new. Oh, I know it's silly, she added, but I bought this copy just before setting out on this journey, and I do wish the best for you both. There was a rumble beneath the floor, and the fireplace blazed, then sank, as if it were blown on a castle-sized sigh of relief. I think, said Alice, we can safely assume that Carl is pleased. The rattles and hums of both Carl and the immediate environment of the castle on the cliff grew in intensity, and a gale buffeted the house. "'Tis a dark and stormy day," exclaimed Miss Pocket as the old coot's tail began to spring to life again. "Night," corrected Alice and Brian together. "Dark and stormy is always a night," Alice kindly explained. "'Tis," mumbled Brian. "What an extraordinary family," observed Iris, mostly to herself. "Don't be pedantic, dear," she gently admonished Brian. Dramatically, 'tis not the time. Brian and Iris shared a faint smile as the darkness and storminess showed no signs of abating and indeed seemed to be growing in strength. The servants grabbed hold of the heavier pieces of furniture, ostensibly to keep them in place, but more to help themselves remain upright. As the weather and Carl both shook violently, Alice shouted, "Hang on! I think this might be it." In a few moments, everyone gazed at the table where the suspenders and book rested together. Then, just as when it seemed that the house itself was being torn apart, all went still. In that moment, the items on the table disappeared in a blaze of white light, and a great gust of wind. Carl gave a massive shudder. Brian and Alice, however, failed to disappear in the same manner. They hesitated, waiting hopefully for some sort of dematerialization, but continued to remain present in every sense of the word. They looked at each other. Alice sighed a little in disappointment. Brian patted his chest. On the plus side, no dress, he murmured. Carl, the castle, seemed happy, rattling and banging along in a way that none of them, not even Alice, could translate well at all. Alice reached out to her brother. His hand was feverishly hot, and it trembled in hers. She turned to face the air and said, "Carl, what are we missing? Don't we have everything in this room to get us home?" The castle banged an enthusiastic door once for yes. "Well then, why are we still here?" Alice demanded. As if in answer, Brian groaned. "I don't feel very well," he said, and was aware of the others gathering around him as he crumpled in on himself. Even sitting up was too agonizing, and he had to lie down. Carl's bangs and squeaks and billowing curtains might have been sympathy for Brian's plight, or could have been a useful set of instructions. As resident oracle, all eyes turned to Alice. Bang, bang, billow, billow, shudder, groan, groan. How is that something I can work with? Alice asked, frustrated. The house seemed frustrated too, grinding its window panes together so strenuously that one of them shattered. Miss Pocket said, "I shall fetch a blanket for Lord Latimer," and left the room. In the meantime, Iris settled more comfortably on the divan, gently letting his head rest on her lap. "There, there, my love, almost safely home. Just a few details to work out," she said reassuringly, her eyes shimmering with tears. "Come to think of it," mumbled Brian from the divan, "there was a tad more to Reg's riddle." "Send for Mr. Shields at once," Alice commanded, and there was no doubt about who was in control. End of chapter 30 of Lord Latimer's Ladies by Margaret Elin Schmidt and Dan McLaughlin, read by Dan McLaughlin.